I heard him before I saw him, the wrong footfall just behind my left heel, a half-beat slow, then a half-beat fast, mocking the rhythm of my own march. Behind that unmoving face, under the weight of the bearskin, I was counting. I had been a sentry of the Queensgate watch for 9 years, and I had learned to count the things a man cannot show. The paces to the turn, the seconds of the relief, the breaths of the fool walking in my shadow who believed a guard who does not turn his head is a guard who cannot see. He thought I was deaf to him. They always do. The crowd at the cobbled edge of the processional thought it too, that the man in red wool was a fixture, a thing to photograph, a statue that drew breath only by some trick of the light. So when the tall stranger in the pale linen jacket fell in behind me, lifting his knees high and slapping his polished shoes down hard on the stone in a clownish parody of my step, the laughter started small and grew. I did not see the laughter. I heard it. I have always heard everything. We were 300 paces into the change of the watch, the long open march from the lower court to the King's Mews along the processional way, when he first matched my stride. I want you to understand what that march is, because the whole of this turns on it. The change is not a parade. It is a working movement, 2 files of us crossing a quarter-mile of open ground in slow time, rifles at the slope, to relieve the men who have stood the morning. The drill is exact because the danger is real. A sentry off his timing is a sentry out of his arc, and an arc out of place is a gap a clever man can use. We march that route the same way every day so that the day it is not the same, every one of us feels it in the soles of our boots. He felt nothing but his own cleverness. I learned his shape from the corner of my eye and the sound of him. A man of perhaps 30, broad and easy, the kind who has never once been told no and has built an entire face out of the certainty that he never will be. Linen jacket, open collar, a heavy steel watch that caught the morning and flashed it at the crowd each time he raised his arm. He raised it often. He was performing not for me, never for me, for them. For the phones already lifting along the rope. Dozens of bright little rectangles turning to catch the man who dared to make the toy soldier look ridiculous. "Eyes front, soldier," he called, close enough that I felt the breath of it on the back of my neck. "That's it. Good little soldier, march." I marched. Here is the thing the crowd could not know, the thing he could not know, the thing I am telling you now because it is the only honest way to tell it. I was not enduring him. Endurance is for men who are losing. I was working. Every part of me that he could see was still chin level, eyes fixed on the standard 100 yards ahead, rifle riding the exact angle the regiment has carried it for 2 centuries. And every part of him that he could not see in me was awake and moving. The set of his weight, the slap of his shoes finding my rhythm and then deliberately breaking it. The way the laughter pulled him forward a pace too close. I have stood a great many posts beside a great many men, and I have learned that the most dangerous person on any ground is the one who has decided the rules do not apply to him, because such a man does not know where his own edge is. He will always go 1 step too far. My only task was to be exactly where I was supposed to be when he did. So I gave him nothing. Not a flick of the eye, not a tightening of the jaw, not the smallest gift of a reaction he could hold up to the cameras and call a victory. I have watched newer men lose this game in the first 10 seconds, a swallowed breath, a muscle jumping in the cheek, and the crowd roars and the provoker feeds on it and it never stops. The stillness is not weakness. The stillness is the trap. A man like the one behind me cannot bear to be unanswered. Denied a reaction, he must escalate to earn one. I was not the one being tested on that march. He was. He simply did not know the examiner wore a bearskin. "He won't even look at me," he announced to his audience, delighted, wounded both at once. "Watch this. Watch, does it even blink? Hello, anybody home in there?" He clapped twice sharp beside my ear. I marched. A woman near the rope said low, "Leave him be." I marked her voice and was grateful for it, the way you are grateful for a single steady light. But she was one and the laughter was many and he was drunk on the many. He skipped ahead of me, walking backward now, 3 feet off my chest, grinning into my face as he went. and for the first time I let myself truly read him, not with my eyes, which stayed past his shoulder on the standard, but with everything else. The flush high on his cheeks. The slight unsteadiness, a man who had begun his celebrating early. The friends somewhere in the crowd egging him with a shout of his name, Dell, they called him, go on, Dell, so that now he had a name to live up to in front of people who knew it. That is when a small thing becomes a large one. A man alone might tire of it and drift away. A man with a name to defend in front of a laughing crowd will keep going until something stops him. I knew then, the way you know weather, that he was going to put his hands or his feet on me. The only questions left were when and how, and whether I would be standing where I needed to be when he did. I lengthened nothing and shortened nothing. I held my pace to the half-second, because the relief was waiting at the Muse Arch, and the drill does not care what a fool is doing in your shadow. The drill is the one thing he could not touch, so I gave myself to it entirely. We passed the old fountain, dry that season, its stone basin ringed with tourists 3 deep, 200 paces to the arch. He had fallen back in behind me again, bored of my face that would not break, and the slapping footsteps resumed, louder, angrier now under the clowning, because a performer who cannot get a rise begins to hate the thing that will not rise. The crowd's laughter had thinned. Some of them had begun to sense what I already knew, that this had stopped being funny 300 paces ago, that the man in linen was no longer playing at mockery but reaching for it, hungry, and that the soldier he was hunting had not so much as twitched. You think you're better than me, Dell said, and the laughter in his voice was gone now, scraped down to something flat and mean. You're nothing. You're a coat and a hat. You're a doorstop with a gun. Anybody could knock you over. 150 paces to the arch. I felt him gather himself. I felt the rhythm of his steps tighten, that little hitch a body makes when it has decided to do a thing and is only waiting for the nerve. I did not slow. I did not speed. I did the one thing 9 years had taught me to do better than anything else in the world. I held my line. He kicked my heel. He did it on the downstep, the way a man trips another in a schoolyard. A quick darting jab of his polished shoe against the back of my left boot, just as it came down and took my weight, so that the foot was driven inward against the right ankle, and the whole moving column of me, 15 stone of man and wool and steel under a tall, heavy bearskin, was thrown off its line of travel mid-stride. It is a small thing to write. It is not a small thing to do to a man marching in slow time with a rifle at the slope. There is a reason the drill exists. A body in motion that loses its base does not stumble gently. It goes down hard, and it goes down where it falls, and on cobblestones with a slung rifle. That is how men break wrists and crack heads, how a weapon can be jolted from a slope it should never leave. I did not go down. I want to be precise about this, because in the days that followed a great many people told a great many versions, and the truest one is also the quietest. I did not catch myself by luck. 9 years is 9 years. When my left foot was kicked across my right, the trained thing in me, older than thought, drilled into the bone on 1,000 wet mornings, drove the right foot out wide, dropped my weight into it, and let the stagger spend itself into a single hard, ugly sidestep instead of a fall. The rifle came off the slope perhaps an inch, and I brought it back. My bearskin tipped, and I let my neck take it and held my chin. For 1 second only, I was not a statue. I was a man fighting the cobblestones for his footing in front of 200 phones, and I won. Then I was still again. I planted, squared, recovered my interval to the file beside me, Corporal Aldrich, who had not so much as glanced over but whose own pace had checked the barest fraction to leave me the room, and I marched on. Eyes front. The standard ahead. The arch 100 paces off. I gave the crowd nothing, because there was nothing in me to give them but the work, and the work does not stop because a man has tried to put it on the ground. Behind me, Dell laughed. It was the worst sound I have ever heard a man make, and I have heard a few. It was triumph with nothing under it. He nearly went over, he crowed. Did you see? Did you get it? He nearly went down. and he laughed again, looking around for the laughter to come back to him. It did not come back. I could not see the crowd. I did not need to. I have stood long enough on that route to read a crowd the way a sailor reads the set of the sea, by the change in the sound of it, and the sound had changed. The laughter that had carried him 300 paces was simply gone, snapped off as cleanly as if a hand had closed over 100 mouths at once. In its place was a silence with an edge on it. Somewhere a woman said, "He could have killed him," not loudly but in the new quiet it carried, and another voice, a man's, hard, "That's assault. That's a soldier. You don't touch a soldier." The mood that had been his had turned all the way around and was now standing at my back instead of his, and Dell. I would learn his full name soon enough, and so would a magistrate. Dell felt it turn, the way you feel a room go cold, and for the first time the easy certain face cracked. But I am ahead of myself, and the part that matters most did not happen in the crowd. It happened where the crowd could not see, and it had already begun. Because here is the second thing the man in linen did not know, beyond the fact that the toy soldier could see him. He did not know that the toy soldier was not alone. He never is. A sentry on the processional way is the visible point of a thing that runs back into the stone on every side, the men of the relief waiting under the arch, the color sergeant pacing the column's flank in his own slow, unhurried time, the plainclothes watchmen who stand among the tourists looking like tourists, the constables of the household police at their fixed points, the eyes in the high windows whose whole task is to watch the watchers. The mockery, the clowning, the slapping feet, all of that was beneath the threshold. A foolish man may make a fool of himself behind a guard all day, and the machine will only watch and wait. But the kick crossed a line that is not a matter of feeling or offense. It is written down. To lay hands or a foot on a sentry of the watch in the execution of his duty is an assault, and the machine that had been watching and waiting does not debate an assault. It moves. I felt it move before I reached the arch. Color Sergeant Hale's voice came from the flank, not loud, the parade ground pitch that does not shout because it does not need to, every word landing flat and final on the stone. "Watchman, the man in the pale jacket, he's not to leave." That was all. He did not break his own measured step to say it. He did not have to point. 3 of the men who had been standing among the crowd in soft coats and ordinary shoes were already closing, unhurried from 3 sides, the way you herd something without letting it know it is being herded, so that by the time Dell thought of the crowd as a way out, the crowd had quietly become a wall. I marched the last 100 paces and did not look back at any of it. That was the hardest 100 paces of my 9 years, not because of the fall I had not taken, but because every instinct a man has says turn, face the one who struck you, answer it. The discipline is in not answering it yourself. The discipline is in trusting that the answer is already coming, in a form a great deal heavier than your own 2 hands, and that your part, the whole of your part, is to keep marching, keep the line, keep the watch, and let the law be the one to turn around. Under the Mews arch the relief was formed and waiting. Corporal Aldrich and I wheeled into the change, and the morning sentries stepped off, and the whole exact machinery of it closed over the moment as if nothing had happened, because that is what it is built to do. I took my new post at the right of the arch, brought my rifle from the slope to the order with a single clean movement, and became a statue again. And from there, finally, eyes front and chin level and giving nothing away, I watched the man in the pale linen jacket begin to understand exactly what he had done. It comes in stages, that understanding. I have seen it on a number of faces over the years, and it always arrives the same way, in the same order, like weather moving through. First there is the afterglow of the act itself, the last of the bravado, the man still half turned to his audience expecting applause. Dell stood in the open space the crowd had made around him, though he did not yet know they had made it, and he was still grinning, still loose, one hand half raised as if to take a bow. The morning sun caught the steel watch and threw it once more, and that was the last time it would flash for him, as the watch of a man in charge of his own day. Then the second stage, the absence of the applause. The grin held a beat too long on nothing. He looked left, looked right, looking for the friend who had shouted his name, and found that the people nearest him had all taken a half step back, the way people do from a thing they have decided is not theirs. The phones were still up, but they had turned. Every bright rectangle that had been pointed at me for 300 paces was now pointed at him. And a man who lives for the camera knows, the instant it happens, when the camera has stopped loving him. He saw himself for 1 second as they were all seeing him, not the clever man who had made the statue dance, but a grown man who had tried to trip a soldier on the stones and then laughed about it, and something went out of his shoulders. It was a joke, he said, to no one, to everyone. It was just a joke, all right, he's fine, look at him, he's fine, nothing happened. Nothing happened. I held my post and let the words hang in the air and rot, because everyone standing there had seen exactly what had happened, and several dozen of them had it in their hands in color. The third stage is the one I always watch for, because it is the one that decides what kind of man you truly have. It is the moment the consequence first becomes real and physical, when it stops being a feeling in the crowd and becomes a hand. One of the plainclothes watchmen, a square, steady man I knew only as Mr. Voss, stepped out of the press and stood in front of Dell, not touching him, close but not crowding, and said something low that I could not hear from the arch. I did not need to hear it. I have heard it said to others, "Sir, I need you to stay exactly where you are." A second watchman had come up on Dell's right, and a constable of the household police in proper uniform was walking over from his fixed point near the fountain, in no hurry at all, which is its own kind of message. You are no longer a man choosing what happens next. The choosing has been taken out of your hands, gently, completely, and you are only now finding out. "I don't have to talk to you," Dell said, and his voice climbed. "Who are you? You're not police. Get out of I'm leaving. I'm going home." He turned to go, and the wall that had been a crowd was simply there, and Mr. Voss said something else, and the constable arrived, and Dell stopped, because a body knows before the mind will admit it when there is nowhere left to walk. "You're joking," he said. "Over a joke, you're going too over that. He's a guard, he stands there. That's the entire point of him. He stands there and takes it." And there it was, the truth of the whole thing, said out loud by the only man on the route who still believed it, that I existed to be a thing done to. That the discipline that kept me from breaking his nose where he stood was not a choice I was making every second, but proof that I could not. He had mistaken the leash for the absence of the dog. The constable spoke then, and his voice carried, level and unbothered, the voice of a man reading out something that was decided long before this morning. "Sir, you've assaulted a member of the Sovereign's Guard on duty. You're being detained. You can make this easy or you can make it hard, but you're not leaving this court except with us." Assaulted. The word landed in the crowd like a stone in still water, and the rings of it spread. I heard it repeated, passed back through the press to the people who hadn't been close enough to hear. Assault. He's being arrested. They're arresting him. And I heard, too, the particular quality of satisfaction in the repeating. Not cruelty. Nothing so small as that. But the deep human relief of seeing a scale come back to level. These were people who had stood and watched a man try to humiliate someone who was not permitted to defend himself, and had felt the wrongness of it gather in them with nowhere to go, and now it had somewhere to go. It went into their phones. It went into the dozen of them who pushed forward, not back, to the constable, holding out their screens. "I have it. I got all of it. From the kick, you want my number." I have thought about that often since, that the very crowd he had performed for, the audience whose laughter had carried him into doing it, became in the space of 10 seconds the thing that would convict him. He had made his witnesses with his own hands. He had asked them to watch. They had watched. Dell's friend appeared at last, the one who had shouted his name, hovering at the edge of the watchman with the sick, uncertain look of a man realizing he is standing too close to something that is about to cost a great deal. "Come on," he said weakly. Can't we just go?" The constable looked at him, and the friend stepped back, and that was the end of any rescue. The leash had become the wall, and the wall had become the law, and the man who had built his whole face out of the certainty that no one would ever tell him no was being told no by everyone at once, in a language he had no answer to, on stones he had thought belonged to him. He looked then at me. Across the open court, past the watchman and the constable and the turning cameras, the man in the pale linen jacket finally turned and looked directly at the soldier he had tried to put on the ground and found him exactly where he had been the entire time. Immaculate, unmoved, rifle at the order, chin level, eyes a fraction over the man's head and fixed on nothing, on duty, on the far wall of the court. I gave him not one thing. Not the grim satisfaction he might have read as proof I cared, not the smallest flicker that would have let him tell himself later that we were two men who had had a quarrel and one had lost. I was not a man who had had a quarrel. I was a sentry of the Queensgate watch, and he was an incident now, a matter for the book and the magistrate, and the most truthful and the most complete answer I could give him was to be precisely, perfectly, what I had been before he ever fell in behind me. I think that was the thing that finally reached him. Not the constable, not the cameras, me doing nothing. The realization, dawning slow and cold, that I had never once been at his mercy, that the stillness he had taken for helplessness had been the most disciplined kind of power, holding itself back on purpose, every second by choice, and that he had spent it all, 300 paces of it, on a man who could have ended him with a turn and a word and had instead simply marched and let the law do the turning. His face came apart, not dramatically. There were no tears, not then. It was quieter than that and worse. The slow collapse of a man's whole picture of himself, the certainty draining out of him in front of the people he had wanted most to impress, leaving something small and gray and frightened in the borrowed linen. They took him in through the side door of the guardhouse off the court, the constable's hand light on his arm, the watchman close, the crowd parting and then closing behind, lifting their phones to the very last. And I stood my post. That is the part no one tells you about, and the part I want you to understand most of all. He was gone, and I stayed. The thing that had nearly put me on the cobblestones was over inside of 5 minutes, and I had 2 hours of my watch left to stand. So I stood them. You do not get to come down off the post because something happened on it. That is what the post is. A man who can keep his discipline only when nothing is testing it has no discipline at all. He has merely been left alone. The morning's worth of it had to come out somewhere, and it came out the way it always does. In the small private war, a sentry fights inside the wall of his own stillness. The heart still going hard from the recovery, the left ankle reporting in that it had been wrenched and would have something to say about it tomorrow. The slow climb down of a body that had been ready to fight and had been ordered by 9 years of training to do the one thing the body least wants to do, which is nothing. I stood there and I let it pass through me and out, breath by counted breath, eyes front, while a fresh tide of tourists who had seen none of it arrived and pointed their phones and marveled at how still I could be. If they only knew, I thought, how loud it is in here. I have not told you yet why I did not fall, not really. The drill is the surface of it. Underneath the drill there is a man, and the man has a history, and a sentry's history is the thing the crowd never sees and the provoker never imagines. Before the red wool, I had spent 11 years in places I do not name to people who buy me a drink and ask, and in those years I had learned the difference between the noise a man makes and the danger a man is. And I had learned to keep my feet on far worse ground than wet cobblestones, with far worse than a drunk in linen behind me. I did not tell the magistrate that, and I will not tell you the half of it. I tell you only this much so you will believe me when I say that Dell never had a chance, and never knew it, and that the restraint he mistook for weakness was the discipline of a man who had been trained, at great cost, to know exactly how much harm he was capable of and to spend, in 9 years on that route, precisely none of it. The dangerous men are not the ones who cannot be still. The dangerous men are the ones who can. At the relief 2 hours on, Color Sergeant Hale walked the line as he always does, slow time, hands behind his back, and when he reached me he stopped, which he does not always do. He did not look at me. He looked as I did, straight ahead, 2 soldiers staring at the same far wall, and he said low, "Anything want seeing to, Trooper Marsh?" Meaning the ankle. Meaning also the other thing, the thing under it. "No, Color Sergeant," I said, "held the line." "You did," he said. There was a silence the exact length of respect. Then, "He's charged, assault on a sentry in the execution of his duty. Statements being taken now, yours when you come off. There'll be more than enough of the rest." A pause. "You'll not have to say much. They've near 40 films of it already, and 3 more came in while we were standing here." Another pause, and then the only thing he allowed himself, dry as the dead fountain. He filmed his own crime and then asked a crowd of strangers to help him do it. "I have been doing this a long time, Marsh, and I do not believe I have ever seen a man work so hard to be arrested." I did not smile. You do not smile on the post. But I will tell you that something in me eased hearing it, because Hale is not a man who wastes words, and the words he had chosen meant that the thing was finished, properly finished, in the way these things must be finished if a sentry is to keep standing his route. Not by my hand, not by a quarrel, not by anything that could ever be laid at my door, or used to say the soldier lost his head. It was finished by the book, with the names written in it and the films filed, and the law turning around to face the man who had thought the law was a coat and a hat. When I came off the watch, they took my account in a plain room in the guardhouse, a constable and a clerk and a recorder running, and I gave it the way I am giving it to you now, flat and complete and without a single word more than what happened. The time, the route, the man falling in behind, the mockery which I noted only because they asked and which I had not reacted to, which they wrote down, the escalation. The words he had used, which I repeated exactly, because exact is the only useful kind of memory in a plain room with a recorder running. And the kick, the downstep, the foot driven across, the loss of base, the recovery described once precisely in the language of the drill, so that there could be no question of whether a man marching in slow time with a slung rifle is endangered by being tripped from behind. He is. I told them how. The doctor who had looked at my ankle by then told them the rest, in his own dry language, and somewhere in the building a young officer was watching 40 films of a man in a pale linen jacket lifting his polished shoe and putting it where it had no business going, on the heel of a soldier who had given him no cause but the unbearable offense of not breaking. The clerk read it back, I signed it, and that I thought was the end of my part. I was wrong about that, in a way I did not expect and have never been sorry for. But it would be a few weeks before I learned it, and in the meantime there was the route, and the route does not stop. So the next morning I marched it again. That is the answer to the question people always ask me when they hear the story and lean in and want the dramatic thing, the thing where the soldier is changed forever by the day a man tried to bring him down. I was not changed. That is the point. That is the entire point of the red wool and the bearskin, and the route walked the same way every day for 200 years. The whole of our discipline is built to make sure that nothing a man like Dell can do will change the soldier, because the moment one of us could be knocked off his line by a fool with a grudge, the line itself would be worth nothing. I marched the route again, the same pace, the same arc, eyes front, and the only difference in all the world was that the cobblestones at the 300-pace mark held, for me, the memory of a foot that had no business there, and that I had not gone down. The films went where films go now. By that evening the thing had spread past the route and past the court and out into the country, watched, I was told, by a great many more people than had ever stood at our rope. I did not watch it. I had been there. But I heard about it the way a sentry hears about everything sideways from the men coming on and off the watch, and what I heard surprised me, and then, the more I thought on it, did not. People had not loved the clip for the kick. They had loved it for the not falling, For the sidestep that was over before most eyes could follow it, the rifle brought back to the slope, the chin held, the march resumed as if the stones themselves had reached up and tried and failed. They watched a man try to take another man's dignity by force, and watched the dignity simply refuse to be taken. And something in them that is tired of seeing the loud and the careless wind stood up and cheered for the quiet man who would not break. I am told the most repeated line under all of it was the one the constable said, "You don't touch a soldier." I am told men who had never given the watch a second thought were stopping at the rope now, on their way to work, just to nod at whoever was standing it. I cannot tell you how that felt from inside the stillness. I can tell you it felt like the root had got a little heavier, in the way that matters, the way that is an honor and not a burden. The hearing came some weeks later. I was required to attend, and I went in my off-duty clothes, which surprised the few who recognized me, that the immovable figure in red was, out of it, only a man of middling height with a careful way of standing. I sat at the back. I did not need to say much, as Hale had told me. The films said it. 40 of them, then more, played for the magistrate from a dozen angles. The man falling in behind, the high mocking knees, the slapping shoes, the clap beside my ear, the walking backward grin, the words, they had the words on 3 separate recordings, a coat and a hat, a doorstop with a gun, anybody could knock you over, and then the kick, slowed down, frame by frame, the polished shoe darting in on the downstep, the foot driven across, the whole moving column of the soldier thrown and the soldier not falling. They played the laughter after. They played the laughter stopping. They played the crowd turning and pressing forward with their screens held out. The magistrate, an unhurried woman who had plainly seen a great many men try to explain away a great many films, watched all of it without a word. Dell's lawyer made the case that you would expect, the only case there was, that it had been horseplay, a joke that went too far, that his client was a man of good character who had been celebrating and had used poor judgment and meant no harm, that no lasting injury had been done. The lawyer said the word again that Dell had said in the court, that I was a guard, that I stood there, that a degree of this came with the post, and the magistrate stopped him. I will remember what she said for the rest of my life, and I will give it to you as near to exact as I can, because it was the truest accounting of the whole thing, and it came from someone who had never worn the wool and owed me nothing. The post, she said, does not come with this. Let me be very clear, because your client appears to believe otherwise, and I suspect he is not the only one. A sentry of the watch stands still and silent and does not defend himself because he is under orders not to, because his discipline is in the service of something larger than his own comfort, and because the rest of us, all of us, are supposed to understand that his stillness is a trust we are not permitted to abuse. It is not an invitation. It is the opposite of an invitation. The man who relies on a soldier's discipline to keep himself safe while he assaults that soldier has not found a clever loophole. He has committed a graver wrong, not a lesser one, because he has turned the man's own honor into the weapon he uses against him. Your client was not safe to do this because the guard was helpless. Your client was safe to do this because the guard was disciplined. There is all the difference in the world, and the law sees it even when the crowd, for 300 paces, did not. She found him guilty. The sentence was the court's to give, and I will not dress it up. It was not a film, and the punishment for tripping a soldier is not the kind of thing that makes a satisfying ending in the way people want one. There was a conviction recorded against his name, which will follow him in every place such things are asked after, for the rest of his working life. There was a fine that mattered, and an order to stay away from the route and the courts of the watch entirely. And there was the thing that I think reached him deepest, though no judge can sentence a man to it, that the films do not go away. That somewhere, for as long as there are screens, there is a clip of a grown man in a pale linen jacket trying to put a soldier on the cobblestones and laughing, and then not laughing, and being walked away by a constable while strangers who had been his audience held up their phones to make sure it was kept. He had wanted more than anything to be seen. He got his wish, entire and forever. And it is the cruelest karma I know, not a blow, not a fall, but the permanent record of the exact moment a man found out who he really was in front of everyone, with no way ever to take it back. I never spoke to him. I have no wish to. I bear him nothing, not hatred, which would be giving him a piece of me he never earned, and not forgiveness either, because forgiveness is a thing you offer a man who asks, and he never asked. I simply went back to the root and I march it still. People ask me sometimes whether it was hard, not the kick, but the holding. Whether I wanted, in that 1 second on the cobblestones with 200 phones watching and a fool laughing at my back, to turn around and answer him the way the body screams to answer. And the honest answer, the only one I have, is yes. Of course I wanted to. I am a man, not a coat and a hat. But wanting to is not the question, and it never was. Any man can swing when he is struck. That is the easiest thing in the world. It requires nothing but a temper. The hard thing, the thing the wool and the bearskin and the 9 years are for, is to be a man with the full ability to end it and the full discipline not to. To hold all that power perfectly still on purpose, second after second, and to trust that the line you keep is worth more than the satisfaction you give up. He tried to trip me, and what he learned in front of everyone is the thing I have known on that route for 9 years and will know until I lay the rifle down for the last time. I did not stay standing because I could not be moved. I stayed standing because I would not be, and there is no man alive, no foot fast enough, no crowd loud enough, who can take that from a soldier who has already decided to give it freely, every single day, to something larger than himself. So I march, eyes front, the standard ahead, the line held. That is the whole of it, and it is enough.